Hello and welcome to Words and Bubbles. Over the past couple of weeks, I've started my countdown of my favourite trade paperbacks of last year. Why trade paperbacks, you ask? Well, not you, the you my imagination has created. The answer to this imaginary question, beyond the simple I like trade paperbacks, is that I've always enjoyed these collections more than the individual issues. Not that I don't like individual issues, and there's certainly advantages to them too, but with trade paperbacks I get to sit down and read, at best a whole story, or, typically at worst, a complete and substantial section of the story. I prefer this to sitting down and just getting into the story before it stops, and then having to wait a month to see what happens next. There's also the fact that no mind needs to be given to whether a book is collectible or not. Also, because trades encompass more of a series than individual comic books, critiques of them are more representative of the series as a whole. I realize I'm waffling, so let's get to this week's book and number 8 on my list, Local Man Volume 1. Heartland. So what you need to know about Local Man? I mean, probably nothing. It's not urgent news from your doctor or anything, so I'm sure you could live a long and happy life without knowing anything about it at all. But I think you might just live a long, ever so slightly happier life if you read it. Notice I said I think at the start of that last sentence. That's because I don't know you, so I'm really not the best person to judge what additions to your reading list will make your life better. So let me tell you a few little things about the book, and then you can judge how likely reading it is to make you happy. The series was created, written and drawn by Tim Seeley and Tony Fleecs. Yes, both of them. I'll get back to this point later. For now let me say that Tim Seeley is a name I've often seen on comic books over the years, but I've never really taken note of him. Up until recently I've never read anything of his that's blown my socks off. Similarly, I've never read anything of his that's done the opposite. What would that be? Maybe something that glued my socks to my feet. No, he's always been somewhere in the middle for me. Now this could be my fault. Because I've always found his work good rather than fantastic, I've never sought it out. So there could well be fantastic, epic things he's done that I have absolutely no idea about. Still, to me he's always been like those actors you see in things, and you know their faces, but it takes you a while to remember where you know their faces from. Tony Fleecs is almost at the opposite pole. I was only aware of one series of his, and that series left an impression. What series, you asked? Again, not you. It was Stray Dogs. A series Forbes said was a crossbreed between Silence of the Lambs and All Dogs Go to Heaven. Kieran Gillian said was a collision between 101 Dalmatians and Criminal Noir. And Scott Snyder said was like Disney meets Psycho. So then, think cute and fluffy meets serial killer, and you get the picture. Now, years ago I used to work in a video shop. And when the salespeople came selling films, one of the first rules I learned was to stay away when they said, it's X meets Y. Because a film called something like Sharkosaurus is going to be much worse than either Jaws or Jurassic Park. But Stray Dogs works, and it works well. And if a cross between Silence of the Lambs and All Dogs Go to Heaven sounds like your cup of tea, then you should try it out. In doing my research for this video, I also discovered that what he was most famous for before Stray Dogs was My Little Pony comics. I don't know whether this fact moves the needle for you when deciding whether you should read his work. It probably shouldn't, because at no point when reading either Stray Dogs or Local Man, when I was unaware what he had worked on before, did I think, you know what this guy would be great at writing? Stories about brightly coloured small horses. So, nothing of My Little Pony and Local Man, but there is a little bit of Stray Dogs. 2 little bits really. The first and most obvious is Pepper, a 40-year-old dog that might just be immortal, who follows our hero around. The second is the genre-bending nature of the series. It's not Disney meets Psycho. That's been done before. Instead, this juxtaposes the frantic, colourful, and quite frankly ludicrous superhero comics of the 90s with what I've seen referred to as a midlife crisis dramedy. Add in the fact that it's a satire, and that's a fair enough assessment. Though to me the tone of the work has more in common with something labelled coming of age than it does something strictly midlife. Also the word dramedy is hideous, but let's not get into that. So how does one trade paperback do all that? More importantly, how does it do that while not becoming a complete mess? To answer that, I need to discuss the story. Okay, so in the 90s, Jack Savere was chosen to be in a superhero team Gen 3. For those of you familiar with Image Comics at the time, think of Gen 3 as being like Youngblood. For the rest of you, they are media-savvy Avengers. Maybe the 7 from The Boys. but they're not as well written as the Seven, and they don't have the history of the Avengers. No, they're pretty shallow when compared to either of these teams. Not that that's a negative in the context of this book. As I alluded earlier, this satirizes early 90s comic books, or a certain type of 90s comic books. Those that were about big muscles and bigger hair, those filled with bosoms and shoulder pads. Those where it was far more important that the hero be cool and extreme, and a rebel and extreme again, because being extreme was very important, than it was for them to be sensible or relatable. Those where it didn't matter if the penciler could draw hands, as long as they could draw guns, really big guns. So Jack, codenamed Crossjack, was in this team. As an aside, he could have been called Crossjack just so that he could wear a cross, much like the X-Men's emblem on his forehead. It's also very possible that, as Tim created him in the 90s when he was 15, this is just a case of a young fan emulating the books he was reading. Whatever the case, Crossjack looks like he belongs in those 90s X books, which fits the story well, as they were the biggest thing in comics in the 90s. Anyway, so Crossjack is in this team, and this team is much like a lot of the other teams at the time. It has its big strong guy, its equivalent of Colossus or Maul or Warpath or Impact or Badrock, or even Guido, who was a strong guy named Strong Guy. In the case of Gen 3, the strong guy is called Big Island, a hero who as a boy sacrificed himself to a volcano and got alien cybernetic muscles as a reward. Which isn't the first thing one imagines will happen to someone who sacrifices themselves to a volcano. Then there's Cutting Edge, its Wolverine Ripclaw Warblade clone, and Camo Crusader, who looks a lot like Cable. My favourite member of the team was probably Air Raider, who, and I'm quoting here, was an Air Force pilot shot down by Russian MiGs, who survived by fusing himself with his plane. Which, if you turn that part of your brain off that says, what, is pretty cool and extreme, and rebellious and extreme. And this team does all the things one would imagine a 90s superhero team doing. It saves the world several times. It gets stranded on an alien planet. It battles the devil. It has mega crossovers with other superhero teams. As for Crossjack, he's rich and he's famous, and the world loves him, and this goes on for years. Then one day, he's kicked off the team and it all stops. We don't immediately discover why he was kicked off the team. In the scheme of things, it doesn't really matter why. But it's fun to guess what shameful act he could have committed, so I won't spoil that here. Point is, he's kicked off the team and is forced to go back home to live with his parents, who are none too impressed with him. He's also back in his hometown, whose residents' opinion of him is worse than unimpressed. They actively despise him, and aren't afraid to tell him so, shouting obscenities at him whenever their paths cross. And this is the real fun of the book. We get to see how stupid and ridiculous comic books are when seen through the eyes of normal people. Because the people in Jack's hometown are normal people. Regular folks who wouldn't be out of place in a real-world small town. People have no place in the world of spandex-wearing heroes, because spandex is impractical, and because fighting others who are also wearing spandex is just kind of stupid. It's a bit like, maybe a lot like, have you ever been into something like an anime series or a sports team or a metal band or a sci-fi book, or yes, a superhero? Something that you love but that you know is weird and out there. At least weird to be immersed into it to the degree you are. I'm sure you have. Not only because I doubt you'd be listening to me if you haven't, but also because I'm sure just about everyone interesting has. So you've got this weird interest, and talking about it to people who are also into it is great. Not only is it interesting to hear other viewpoints on something you love, but it also connects the two of you, deepens the friendship. But then, have you ever had someone else ask you about it? Someone normal and grounded, possibly someone you respect, someone who in no way is into anime or sci-fi or whatever. Telling them about it is brutal, isn't it? Trying to read their eyes as they watch you try and make Pokemon or Teen Titans Go sound like a reasonable interest for a well-adjusted person your age to have. For a horrible moment, you see your interest as they must, as small and foolish, maybe as garish or childish. That's what it's like for Jack. For years he's been in the world of superheroes, and it was great because so was everyone else in his life. Now that he's out of it, he must look at that world, with all its weirdness, as an outsider. Which brings me back to something I mentioned earlier, that both Tim Seeley and Tony Fleecs are responsible for the book's art. You see, they decided that a good way for us readers to appreciate the difference between Jack's old life and his new is for them each to draw one of those periods. Fleecs would draw the bulk of the book, that part that takes place in the present, in Jack's hometown, and aided by Brad Simpson's near-faultless colouring, that section is restrained and muted, mellowed with age when compared to the brashness of Seeley and Felipe Sobrero's work of when Crossjack was still a member of Gen 3. That part, the Gen 3 part, is as over-the-top as the books it's emulating. So everything I've told you is all good and well, but it doesn't really explain why Local Man is on my list. I mean, the book probably sounds like it could be funny as a lampoon that mocks and ridicules. Something as shallow as the fare it derides. The thing is, that's not the case at all. There's nothing mean-spirited about the satire. On the contrary, it's clear Seeley and Fleecs deeply appreciate the works they're satirizing. Them writing this book is a conversation they're having with us about an absent friend we all love. A friend who got up to shenanigans but was always good at heart. A friend we miss and now enjoy reminiscing about. What's more, the actual story, which involves Jack trying to solve the mystery of who killed his old arch-nemesis, is good, fun, poignant, maybe even a little bit profound. He does this investigating wearing a balaclava and under the pseudonym of Local Man, because not only does Gen 3 own all the rights to Crossjack, but he can't investigate as himself because Jack Xavier signed a restraint of trade and is legally prohibited from doing any superheroing, which includes investigating. But as you know, Jack has left the world of superheroes behind. He's now in the world where everybody knows him, where everybody knows his parents, where his old girlfriend runs the local baked goods store and is married to a guy named Brian, who happens to be the sheriff of the town. And in that world, when a man takes a pseudonym and puts on a mask, well, he's still the same man he's always been. It's just now that he's walking around in a balaclava. So when the investigative trail he's on leads him to the world he's left behind, it's him, for most intents and purposes a normal man, against foes who are still super. Okay, that covers everything I wanted to say about Local Man. Before I go, the Local Man trade includes a number of tribute alternative covers. I'll include them here. I'll also include those covers I could find that were being paid tribute. If you know the last two, the ones I couldn't find, please leave a comment. Thanks. And thanks for watching, and please come back next time.